Professor Marandi, the country Iran I know, since the revolution, it was always this sort of mindset in the mind of decision makers in Iran that the United States is going to attack sooner or later. They're going to attack Iran. It was always the case because of the identity of the revolution. It was anti-imperialism. It was against the U.S. leverage, U.S. pressure in the region, dominance in the region. They didn't want that, and so that was always the case, that the war gonna come. But the way that the United States started this war was so much shocking, because many people never thought that they're gonna start with the assassination of the supreme leader, with the assassination of those kids in this in the primary school in Minab. These were huge shocks for the Iranian people. And this is the way it is today, because their understanding, as I understand it, it was that it's going to be all on the battlefield. It's going to be the two armies coming together and fighting each other, not assassination, not the way that Israel fights its wars. This was, I think that was a moving sort of shock for Iranian people.
Yes, I mean, even and on a sort of, I digress, but even I don't follow football that much, if at all. But even this whole incident or this whole affair where Trump forced FIFA to allow a U.S. player who was banned from the game with Belgium, uh, forcing them to allow him to play. That is very symbolic of U.S. behavior in general. Trump is more crude than previous U.S. presidents, but the United States sees itself as above the law, with special privileges. It can do whatever it wants, and because they see themselves as exceptional, and this is true across the West when it comes to the United States. They think that they have the moral authority to slaughter kids, to destroy the lives of millions of people, whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq or Libya or anywhere. This is the this is the United States, and so this is how they treat the rest of the world. And so Iranians always felt that, or at least the elites in Iran felt that there was ultimately going to be war. Now, not everyone believed that. I think the liberal faction in the Iranian political elite thought that they could have some sort of deal with the United States, and if we dealt with them differently, that they would leave us alone. And that obviously was naive, and it didn't work. And actually, many of them, their views have evolved. Uh, a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, I said somewhere else that this was on Iranian television. I saw it online, so I'm not sure if it was from an Iranian TV channel or it was one of those Iranian online programs. But one of the reformist, the head of one of the reformist political parties in Iran, was on the show, and he said that Ayatollah Khamenei was right about building these underground missile bases and developing Iran's missile technology and drone technology. And if we were in control of the armed forces, Iran would have collapsed by now. He was saying that. He was saying we were wrong. And you remember as well as I, in Iran, there was a lot of criticism directed towards Ayatollah Khamenei over the last couple of decades about Iran's drone program. They were the West was making fun of Iran's drones. Back then, Iran, I think the only country that was really well, I'm not sure if it was the only country, but it was the only country that I recall that was really pursuing drones was Iran, and they were making fun of Iran's drones until, of course, the Ukraine war began and the Russians began using Iranian drones, and they were making fun of Iran's missile program, criticizing. And so many people in Iran, politicians, people in government, even in different administrations, were criticizing the money spent for the underground bases, the drone program, the missile program, and basically criticizing Ayatollah Khamenei for this, even though Iran's military expenditure is lower than other countries in the region. But instead of buying far lower. And instead of purchasing lots of jets from foreign countries and things like that, expensive planes. They went and developed a military strategy which was less expensive, more indigenous. They invested in technology, and ultimately it worked because the Iranians knew that if, let's say, they bought 200 jets or 150, 250, I don't know, 150 jets or whatever, very expensive, that the Americans would have still outgunned them, and they couldn't have won the war that way. So the only they really thought about how can we fight a war with Americans and win. And this is a strategy that's been pursued more or less for decades. And after the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, it intensified the speed. So people now are seeing that Ayatollah Khamenei's military strategy, because it's his strategy, he was the one who presided over it for the last few decades, was brilliant. And even though he was martyred, and so many of the commanders in last year's war and this year's war were murdered, the country won the war. And it wasn't just about survival. I mean, many people were saying during the war, well, if Iran just survives that. During the first week, people thought Iran would collapse outside of Iran. Many of us here didn't think that way. I was confident Iran would win. Many others were confident too. Perhaps not to the degree that it actually did win, but we were confident. But many people thought Iran would be defeated. Then, gradually, after a week or so, when they saw that Iran wasn't going to fold, they said, well, if Iran just survives, that's a win. But Iran did far more than just survive. Till the last moment, they were hammering US bases, Israeli regime assets, and those regimes that were assisting the United States in the war in the region. So his he was vindicated despite all the critiques in Iran by liberals mostly, and as I said, many of them now accept this. So what the United States has done is that it has helped demolish the worldview of many liberals in Iran who thought that we could, if we behaved differently towards the United States, that the United States would behave in a more reasonable manner towards Iran. People don't think that way anymore.
Yeah. I think his role in what Iran is today, economically, militarily, strategically, regionally, geopolitically, is so bold. And I remember during those days of negotiations, there were people who were arguing, well, we may negotiate on the missile program of Iran, we may do something about it. But he said that no, that's not going to happen. That's the red line. And I think his role in what is happening today and what has happened, you know, during the war between Iran and the United States is so important, not only in the military aspect, but also in the institution he has created for many years. This sort of command system of multiple layers that he has created that finally led to, to the outcome that we've seen with the war, that you assassinate the commanders, the supreme leader, you don't see the collapse coming to the system because the system is working. The system is somehow in multiple layers, and they can reproduce. The system can reproduce itself. This is the outcome of his leadership, I think, because right after the revolution, we had the war between Iran and Iraq, and after the war, the first supreme leader of Iran passed away. So he started with huge problems domestically, geopolitically, economically. And today, what he delivered to the Iranian people, to the Iranian history, it's unbelievable.
And, if you look at the situation in Iran today, we've been under maximum pressure sanctions for decades. We've gone through 2 wars in the last year. They've destroyed a lot of infrastructure or damaged it. And we've had a siege for, I don't know, 2, 3 months on all of our ports. So the economy has been hit hard during this period. The people who came to his funeral, many of them are from the disenfranchised, the working class, the people who've suffered the most as a result of these wars. And you know as well as I that going to this funeral will take a full day. Just getting there and going. I mean, when I got back home, I had to sleep for a couple of hours. I was so exhausted. I mean, I'm not young anymore, but in any case, it was almost 3 hours on my way there. I don't know how I don't remember how long it took me to get back, but I was there for like I don't know. We walked for quite a few hours from near Engelov Street to Azadi Square, and then back to Engelov Square. Uh, it was many kilometers, but some people walked all the way from Imam Hussein. Sorry, your audience doesn't know what I'm talking, but they walked a lot more than me. Someone the streets of Tehran were crowded at 5 a.m. The funeral didn't even begin until like 8 or so. So, and these a lot of these people, as I said, these are like working class families, working class people with more than enough trouble, uh, to handle. But they spent so much time going there, and that's because he, based on Islamic and Shia tradition in particular, supported the oppressed or supported the disenfranchised. Imam Khomeini was like that too, and in his massive funeral you saw the same elements. You saw people from all walks of life, but the people who really give the most support are those who are from the classes that or in society that are more vulnerable. And of course, his position across the world was the same. He supported liberation movements in Southern Africa during when he was president. He traveled to the frontline countries in Southern Africa to boost them and to help them support the resistance against apartheid South Africa. He supported Cuba, uh, especially when it was really bad after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Um, Nicaragua, Venezuela, when Venezuela is facing tough times now, and I have friends there, and it's very sad. But when the Americans were targeting the economy a few years ago, uh, he gave them a lot of assistance at a time when Iran was under maximum pressure sanctions. I mean, Iran's capabilities to help are limited. And then, of course, the most important of all is the Palestinian cause and his sympathy for the Palestinian people and his optimism about the future of Palestine is, I think, known to everyone. So he was always a person based on his world ideological worldview, uh, who supported the deprived and the oppressed and the disenfranchised wherever they were. And in Iran, despite all the difficulties as a result of war and sanctions and uh, and violent riots and military um, armed insurgencies, despite all that and carried out by the West, you know he tried his best to encourage different administrations with their differing worldviews. Some of them were liberal, some of them were left. He encouraged all of them to focus on the disenfranchised in Iran during difficult circumstances and under ordinary circumstances. And that is a part of the reason why he's so popular. And that is why Iran has been so steadfast in its support for the Palestinian people. And that is why so many millions of people went to the streets. You know this as well as I. There's a huge Persian media apparatus outside of Iran that's all hostile, funded by Western governments. There's nothing like it for any other country, not for Russia, not for China. And the reason is that back in the day when Russia had still not risen and China and Russia were still not the powers that they are now, Iran was the focus of the West's hatred. Remember the axis of evil and all that. So they were funding at that time, they were funding all these media outlets in Persian, and so all the time they were saying, "Why are you spending money to support the Palestinians? Why are you giving money to these Arabs?" I mean, they are these Persian media outlets. You know them; they are very racist, very anti-Muslim, very. I mean, they're horrible, but they're constantly telling the Iranians, "These Arabs hate you. these Sunni Palestinians hate you. They hate the Shia. They think you're not Muslim. They think you're, they're enemies, and they were constantly fed this propaganda so that in order to create friction in Iran, to create a wedge between the population and Ayatollah Khamenei and those who are supporting the Palestinian cause. They've been doing this for decades, but to no avail. And we saw in the funeral that all of these conspiracies against the country, all these attempts to undermine the popularity of the revolution, the Islamic Republic, to undermine its support for uh, resistance organizations and resistance groups and the disenfranchised and the marginalized. All of these have led to nothing. All you have to do is just look at the footage, and you see that all that money spent, all those many billions of dollars of money spent, all of those sanctions, all of those wars, and that says a lot, not just about Ayatollah Khamenei and uh, and his leadership, but it says a lot about the Iranian people.
How does Iran see the region? We've seen Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and these countries coming to the funeral, and I think after all, the relationship or the partnership, I don't know, we can call it partner, the relationship between Iran and GCC countries is in a new phase, is a new sort of era. But in this new era of which is imposed by the outcome of the war, it's not something coming out of nowhere, because the war has happened between Iran and the United States. GCC countries were participating, helping the United States and their attack on Iran. Then you see Iran, uh, you know, coming out of this war, you know, forcing the United States out of region. The attacks on the American bases in GCC country, it was huge. Look at the outcome of the war for Iranian people, for Iranian army, for IRGC. And these people are watching that in GCC countries, looking at what's going on, for example, with their security in the region. They have a very important decision to make. And how do you see that decision on their part? Are they going to learn from what has happened so far? Are they going to, continue on the same path as before this war started? What is the understanding, perception on the part of Iranians with the ongoing talks between the two sides, Iranians and GCC countries?
It's difficult to say. I mean, these countries are ruled by family dictatorships, and they've been bound to the West. And I mean, they all of their children, their children, their parents, they went to the West to study. They go to the West for vacation. Their money is invested in the West. They take huge amounts of wealth from these countries for themselves, and they put them in invest them in Western economies, and take palaces and apartments and mansions. So, and I'm sure many of them are deeply compromised. I mean, the Epstein um, files do show that the Epstein class exists in the Persian Gulf, especially in the Emirates. Senior people linked to Epstein were exposed, and I'm sure there are many other Epsteins out there, and big and small. So it's hard to say if they are reasonable. There's a path forward, and there has been some change, as we discussed before, where in recent weeks, when the Americans would violate the ceasefire and attack Iran, um, the Iranians would strike U.S. bases in the region. And in the last few instances, they did not strike bases in Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, or Qatar, but they did in Kuwait and Bahrain. And the last time, also, they hit Jordan, a U.S. base in Jordan, very hard, destroying a lot of U.S. equipment there. So there's a reason why they haven't been bombing these countries. So there is progress. But at the same time, it's very complicated. A big piece of news was, as we discussed before, the Iranian passenger airliner that flew to Yemen. And this is a big deal. It broke the siege on Yemen that was like 10 years there for 10 years. But the Saudis tried to prevent the Iranian passenger plane from landing. That's harassing a passenger plane is no small thing. They failed. The pilot was courageous, and he continued to move towards the airport, and he landed. But what the point I'm making is that the gap is great. But there is a history where Iran has forgiven these regimes in the past. In the 1980s, at the behest of the West, they and the United States, they supported Saddam Hussein's invasion of Iran when the West and Germany in particular gave him chemical weapons. They funded that, and they funded the Saddam's armed forces, hundreds of billions of dollars. Back then, money was worth a lot more than today. But after the war, when Saddam went and invaded one of them, Kuwait, these countries wanted rapprochement with Iran, and Iran forgave them. And in the 90s, we had relatively good relations with these countries, even though they had helped kill, I don't know how many people exactly were martyred in the war with Saddam, but I think if you include the assassinations that across Iran through the MEK and the support for terrorists in Kurdish areas, probably near almost 200,000, all in all, everything together, 190,000 or so. So they were involved, deeply involved, just like they were involved in this war. But Iran does want a stable Persian Gulf. They want regional countries to move closer to each other, and they want the Americans out. So if they choose to change policy, the Iranians would definitely be more than willing to also move in that direction. But again, so many of them are deeply compromised, and it's difficult to say what lies ahead. But there's no doubt that the 4.5 months or 4 months or so that we've gone through, including the ongoing funeral, has put Iran in a much stronger position. And I think the funeral itself is enhancing Iran's stature and strength by the hour, literally.